Welcome back. Time for, I think this is part 4 of Avril Crump. So we left off with kind of a cliffhanger. Um, Avril had gone into her secret hiding place, this sort of broom closety room upstairs, just to write her resignation letter. And Dr. Weatherby had followed her trail all the way up there. And then he confronted her and he was all excited about busting her for having an unauthorized experiment because he thinks the board of directors of Leviticus Laboratories will love him if he does that. And then they found that chest and they were fighting with it, and she dropped her old chemistry set in, and then there was a huge explosion. So I'll go back just a tiny bit and then we'll read the next section. And as the pair of them struggled, Avril's snack box, Uncle Edgar's chemistry set, slipped out of her grasp and flew into the air. It performed a beautiful little backflip, losing its polished wooden lid and showering its contents everywhere. Orange powder sprayed like fireworks. Chocolate cupcakes and cheese Danish rained from the sky. Strange yellow liquid splashed from uncorked tubes. Peculiar purple pellets twirled through the air, and the entire box, sweets and all, landed smack in the open replication chamber. There was a colossal, flame-throwing, window-shattering explosion. Chapter 3 is called Crawling from the Wreckage. The whole place went up in smoke, and what smoke it was! Thanks to Uncle Edgar's chemistry set, the explosion was truly spectacular. The purple pellets ricocheted off all 4 walls and the ceiling before performing a tap dance on the window ledge. It must have been the strange yellow liquid that gave off that vile, eggy odor as it burnt, and the various colored powders rained down in glorious technicolor, turning everything in Lab 1 into a blue, orange, lavender, or scarlet version of its former self. Indeed, had it not been for these bright new colors, nothing in the room would have been visible at all, so thick was the smoke. It billowed out and was the color of old men's toenail clippings and smelled not dissimilar. This was a disaster. Not only was Avril knocked out as her head hit the concrete floor of Lab 1, not only was she now likely to be in real trouble with the board of directors, but Uncle Edgar's chemistry set, Avril's most treasured possession, was a burning wreck. Avril did not remain unconscious for long. After coming to, she lay still for a good 10 minutes, trying to get herself together. She straightened her legs and disentangled them from each other. She rolled over onto her back and checked that all her teeth were intact, the ones that had been intact before the explosion anyway, and then she slowly began to sit up. "I'm blind!" Avril was not a woman to panic unnecessarily, so she double-checked that her eyes were open before giving way to hysteria. "I'm blind!" she wailed again. "I can't see!" She moved onto her hands and knees and began to shuffle around, knocking her bald head on the burning remains of the chair. "Somebody help me!" she choked. Then she realized that it was the smoke that was making her sputter. That was also why she couldn't see. This stopped her from panicking. Avril had been involved in too many exploding experiments to worry about a little smoke. She slumped down very low to breathe the cleanest air and tried to remember where the door was. Avril was nothing if not courageous. She began to crawl. She had not made it to more than a meter before her hand touched something soft. Gingerly, she moved it upward. She was touching something fleshy. It was not altogether pleasant. "Dr. Weatherby?" She jumped to her feet, ignoring the drowning sensation in her smoke-filled lungs, seized the hand that she had been touching, and began to pull. "Don't worry," she puffed, pulling with her all not inconsiderable weight. "I'll save you." Bellowing like a wrestler, she started to drag the body toward the doorway. Just hang on in there. Avril was starting to enjoy herself. She sort of felt like an action hero. Stay with me, bud, she panted. We're going to get you out of here. Unfortunately, one of the unconscious body's large feet hooked itself around the door frame, and Avril wasted several minutes of tugging before she realized the problem and detached it with one mighty heave. They were out. We made it. Avril fell on her companion in exhaustion. For a moment, she was too worn out to speak or move. There she lay in the hallway, splayed in weary triumph, her chest heaving and her eyes watering. Get thee off me! The quavering cry pierced the smoky air. I canst not breathe! Get thee off! It trailed into a weak gurgle. Oh, don't be such a wimp, Dr. Weatherby, Avril said. It's the smoke in your lungs. That's the reason you can't breathe. It'll clear in a minute. Have a good cough. Nay, nay, 'tis thee. What manner of beast art thou? Some sort of elephant? This did not sound like Dr. Weatherby. His insults were usually delivered in nasty, sneering tones, not 17th century English. Dr. Weatherby? I beg thy pardon. It was not Dr. Weatherby. Avril turned to look into the face of the person she had rescued. She began to tremble. The sight before her eyes was extraordinary. The collapsed figure was that of an immensely long and equally scrawny man. His bony frame was clothed in some sort of antique black and red uniform, with smart epaulets and a great deal of dazzling medals. His face was gaunt, his hair unkempt, his eyes wide. Mesmerized, Avril sat up. Hallelujah, the man gasped, sitting up too. Air! Avril stared at him. She hiccuped. Oh dear, art thou unwell? Hast thou some malady? He patted Avril on the back. Take thee a deep breath, my lady. My lady? Avril gaped. I'm just Avril. Enchanted to make thy acquaintance, Lady Avril. Now that he wasn't having the life crushed out of him, the man was extremely polite. He extended a hand. Avril shook it. It felt very warm. Who are you? I know not, but my birth is all thanks to thee, Lady Avril. Well, I suppose, Avril attempted to collect her thoughts. I suppose it is thanks to me in a way. Me and Uncle Edgar's chemistry set, assuming that you just came out of the replication chamber. Now it was the man's turn to stare. Why, Lady Avril, I believe this explosion has made thee a bit funny in the head. He scrambled to his feet. Vertical, he looked even taller. He was at least 7 feet tall. Prithee, he reached out to help Avril stand up. I have a suggestion, Lady Avril. Let us repair to a simple tavern or hostelry. A hearty plate of stew is just what thou needest. Avril was not listening. She reached up as far as she could and touched his face. A human clone. The clone blinked. He opened his mouth to speak, displaying unhealthy-looking gray teeth. Before a word emerged, however, there was a noise from inside Lab 1. Help! Avril and the clone looked at each other. Neither moved. Help! It was louder this time. There was no mistaking it, and although it was a male voice, it was definitely not Dr. Weatherby's. Oh, fine. Don't help me, then. I'll just lie here in an exploding room, facing certain violent death. Gadzooks! The clone's arm shot into the air, a bony finger pointing to the source of the voice. There's somebody else in there. There's no need to worry about me, came the voice. I can die horribly any time. The incredibly tall man let out a shriek. He will die, Lady Avril. We must save him. Tell me what to do. Deep in the recesses of Avril's stupefied mind, something clicked. She felt a powerful sensation course through her. It stared at her toes and sprinted upward, making her bald head tingle. If she had hair, it would have stood on end. There was at least one more clone in there. Lady Avril, her companion whimpered. He will perish. Avril gathered her courage. Stay low, she instructed the man. He nodded down at her from a great height. On second thought, Avril corrected herself, just take a very deep breath. The clone took an enormous gulp of air. He burped gently. Then he tried again. Cheeks puffed outward, eyes already bulging. He held out his hand. Avril laced her stubby fingers through his spindly ones and squeezed. Let's go! Chapter 4 is called An Eddy Makes Three. The smoke in Lab 1 was no longer pea soup thick. The explosions had diminished to feeble popping. It was into this eerily calm atmosphere that Avril and the clone stepped, hand in hand. There was something in the middle of the room. It could have been someone, but it was still quite hard to make anything out. Perhaps it was Dr. Weatherby. Avril peered through the wisps of smoke. Wow, she said, this smoke is toxic stuff. It's making me think I can see a dog down there on the floor. Woof, woof, came a sarcastic voice. By thunder, the tall, spindly clone's face glowed white. A talking dog! Sprawled comfortably on the floor, propping itself up on Uncle Edgar's now charred and overturned chemistry set with a paw supporting its head, lay a medium-sized, floppy-eared, mud-brown dog. There were no two ways about it. It was canine, and it spoke. Anyway, thanks for showing up, it yawned. It crossed its two hind legs and glanced languidly at its left paw. It appeared to be inspecting its claws. Nasty situation here. This smoke is very unpleasant. Avril finally found her voice. She'd been searching for the usual one, her familiar blend of boom and squeak, rather than the strangled tones that now emerged. Do you need rescuing? She asked. The dog's right ear pricked up. If you would, it said. It gave a small cough. It's bad for the lungs, you know. Hast thou broken a leg? Gasped the tall clone. Canst thou not walk? Allow me to lift thee, Mr. Dog, and I shall bear thee from this place to safety. The dog stretched out luxuriantly. All right, get moving. You don't look injured, Avril said. Injured? Echoed the dog. Not at all, though it's only thanks to my dazzling display of quick thinking and nimbleness. Dodging burning missiles isn't child's play, you know. So, if you're not injured, Avril continued, why couldn't you just escape yourself? Why all the yelling for help? She felt very cross, mostly on behalf of the poor, panic-stricken tall clone. The dog looked slightly abashed, but only for a moment. Well, it said airily, I do have a small injury. Could be a shattered spine or a wrenched pelvis, nothing serious. I didn't even think to mention it. It squeezed out a brave tear. My dear fellow, the clone gathered the dog up in his arms like a baby. Fret not. The dog swung its tail. I'll try not to. Oh, it added, nodding at Avril. You should get back to rescuing that girl in the corner. She hasn't looked too healthy for a while. Avril spun around. A little girl? There she lay, curled up in the corner of Lab 1 as though she were having a quiet afternoon nap. Avril sank to her knees and grabbed the girl's wrist. A pulse. A good, steady pulse. She was not only alive, she was well. Urgh. And she could talk. Urgh wasn't exactly an articulate turn of phrase, but at least she hadn't barked. Avril shook her vigorously, desperate to wake her up. The girl opened her eyes. Strange dream, she said. She stared at Avril and blinked. Am I awake now? Avril gazed back at her. The shiny, straight, light brown hair, the fresh eyes, the friendly button nose. She smiled. You're awake, she said. She picked up the singed old lab coat that her snack box had been wrapped in and carefully placed it around the little girl's shoulders before holding out a hand to help her stand. Now, let's get somewhere we can talk. Prithee, madam, piped up the tall, bony clone, should we assist this poor gentleman? He was pointing at the floor, where a dozing Dr. Weatherby lay. Oh no, Avril said, leading the clones from Lab 1. He'll be all right for a little longer. We'll come back for him later. Out in the hallway, Dr. Sedecta smoothed her long hair, pulled the cell phone from her pocket, and dialed a number. It's me again, she whispered. You won't believe what I just saw. Next door to Lab 1 was a large broom closet. There was plenty of room for Avril and the clones to sit on upturned buckets and talk. Right. Avril took a deep breath and tried to look capable. She felt completely responsible for these poor clones. First things first. This is a very unusual situation, she began. Perched imperiously on his bucket, his spine and pelvis looking in mint condition, the dog snorted. Let's begin, Avril continued, with a few introductions. Get to know each other a little. I'm Avril Crump. I'm a scientist. I like insects. I'm trying to create a miracle sponge that mops up oil spills. My favorite color is green. I've got a little green vintage convertible sports car that means I can drive around with the top down. Avril thought hard. I like donuts. She gave up. I'm sorry, she said. It doesn't sound very exciting. I'm still in shock, I think. I can't believe I'm sitting here talking to 3 clones. There was a pause. The girl spoke. Sorry, Avril, but what's a clone? I'm not sure we understand. Do we even want to? Said the dog. Avril moved forward on her bucket, eager to explain. Cloning is a way of duplicating a living organism so it has exactly the same characteristics as the original. Same DNA. That means, she said, catching the girl's confused expression, done same face, same body, same everything. It's already been done with animals, sheep, rats, spiders, she added rather wistfully. But cloning a person, well, that's a different matter. It's never been done before. But there was a scientist here years ago named Professor Blute who wanted to be the first to clone a human, a perfect human. It seems, however, to have gone slightly wrong. The tall, thin clone sniffed sadly. Mean'st thou that we are imperfect? Avril put a reassuring hand on his arm. That's not it, she said. I just mean that he was trying to put together a sort of superhuman. I'm sure the three of you all have all sorts of wonderful talents. People say that Professor Blute raided graves for toenails and hairs to get the DNA he needed, like William Shakespeare's, for example. The clones were looking blank. He was a brilliant playwright, so you'll probably all be ever so good at reading and writing. Avril tried to think of all the staff room whispers she had overheard about Professor Blute's experiment. Oh, and you might have the cells of a famous general named Napoleon. Although, now that I think about it, she eyed the dog nervously. Perhaps it's a hair from his cherished pet instead. Avril's voice trailed off. The girl was staring straight at her. Do you mean to say, she said, that we are a hodgepodge? Not a hodgepodge exactly, more like a rag bag of odds and ends, a cocktail of bits and pieces? Avril was feeling very small. That's not what I meant to. Well, I think that's fantastic. The girl beamed at her 2 fellow clones. The thin man beamed back, and the dog grimaced. Isn't that nice, the girl continued, to be a mixture of all those wonderful people? We must know all sorts of things. A playwright, you say? Is that why he, she pointed at the man, talks like that? I suppose so, Avril said. Though how he ended up wearing that uniform is completely beyond me. Oh, get a life, the dog yawned. Who cares about his choice of outfit? And this dog, the girl said? Am I right in thinking that dogs can't usually talk? Yeah, right, said the dog scornfully. A dog that can't talk. What parallel universe are you living in? This is so cool, the girl said. Her eyes were shining. Avril noticed that one eye was sea green while the other gleamed warm amber. What with that and her rosy cheeks, her face bore a striking resemblance to a set of traffic lights. I mean, we're totally unique, she continued, and nobody's done this before? Cloned someone? Not until now. It isn't even allowed. The girl's face fell. Not allowed? Are we in some sort of trouble? Of course not, Avril patted her hand. It's not your fault that Blute was trying to create human clones. Humans, humans, humans. The dog's shoulders drooped mournfully. I'm starting to feel like a second-class citizen here. He gave a loud sniff. Oh, Mr. Dog, thou art not second class. The tall clone stroked the dog's tail. Don't be nice to me, the dog's voice wobbled. It's the tenderness I can't bear. He burst into noisy sobs. Avril and the girl exchanged a glance. I wouldn't mind so much, the dog turned to the tall clone, sensing an ally, if I felt that I was being taken seriously. I mean, I haven't even been given a name, for Pete's sake. An enormous tear fell onto the floor. The dog looked rather pleased with himself before hurriedly rearranging his features. But, Mr. Dog, don't you see, the dog interrupted, that calling me Mr. Dog simply increases my feelings of isolation? He cast a baleful glance at his companions, sank miserably onto his hind legs, put his paws over his eyes, and stayed very still. He's right, Avril said, not unmoved by the dog's pitiful posture. You should have names, but I'm afraid I have no ideas at all. You should pick names for yourselves. Oh no, the girl said. It'd feel so much nicer if you chose them for us. She looked at the tall clone for support. He nodded vigorously. Avril felt a warm glow in her stomach, as though someone had just lit a birthday cake inside her. The glow spread upward. She was blushing. Gosh, names. Absolutely. See? The dog raised his head for a moment, possibly to show off the second huge teardrop he had manufactured. She can't think of names for us at all. Bonaparte! The word sprang from Avril's lips. She pointed at the tall clone. He looked as surprised as she did. Bonaparte? He asked. Yes, Bonaparte, Avril said. It was Napoleon's other name. It's perfect, said the girl. Plus, added the dog, his voice muffled by the paws over his head, it can be shortened to Boney. The tall clone's lips moved as he silently tried out his new name. Then a smile appeared. It was the broadest thing about him. Bonaparte, he said. He got to his feet and gave a deep bow, bumping his head on the ground. At thy service. What about me? The girl sounded rather shy. Avril thought very hard. She ran through her colleagues at Leviticus before realizing that she did not know any of their first names. She couldn't name this little girl Doctor. Maybe there was something suitable she could remember from her childhood. The girls at school had often had pretty sounding names. If she could recall, let's see, Mary, Susan, Jessica. The trouble was that though the names were pretty, the memories of their owners were not. Avril Crump's a bald fat lump rang in her ears. She bit her lip. Let's think of something else. Primula, perhaps. Heavens no, not that individual. Avril groped at the air a little as if trying to pluck the right name from it. Her eyes glazed with concentration. Suddenly, her fist snapped shut somewhere above her bald head. Edna! Edna? The girl looked perturbed. Don't you think maybe Mary? No. Avril radiated pleasure. Edna is perfect. How could I have forgotten it? When I was a little girl, all my toys were named Edna. All your dolls and stuff? The girls asked, extremely doubtfully. Dolls? Avril waved a hand vaguely, recalling the terrible fate of the one and only doll she was ever given. Teddy bears, cuddly dragons, wind-up cars, train sets. She sighed. Many happy hours I spent with Edna the engine. It's a nice name, the girl was diplomatic, but perhaps I could shorten it? Eddie isn't too bad. Edna, Eddie, whatever, wonderful. Avril clapped her hands. Now, she turned to the dog. This is a tricky one. No, it isn't. The dog's voice was muffled. Augustus. Bonaparte handed him his handkerchief. The dog raised his head and fixed him with a hard stare. It wasn't a sneeze. It's my name. Augustus, he repeated. Like the Roman emperor. In fact, I think I may have a dash or two of Roman emperor in me. He flicked his tail. What do you say? The pride of my bearing, the nobility of my profile, the terror, he gave Avril a stare, of my gaze. Well, Avril said, I don't think there was any Roman emperor in the cloning mix, but perhaps... The dog held up a paw in silence. Roman emperors, he said, are born, not made. Your Highness! Overwhelmed, Bonaparte gave another sweeping bow, this time avoiding the floor. I am indeed honored to be in thy imperial presence. We are unfit to breathe your air, my liege, and yet in thy magnanimity and greatness of spirit thou communest with us, thy poor servants. Yes, well, the dog looked faintly uncomfortable at this display of adulation. My name is Augustus, so there you are. There we are indeed, says Avril, sensing that Bonaparte might launch into another embarrassing speech. So, she looked around at the three clones and scratched her head. What do we do now? It came out sounding more worried than she had intended, but really, she was at a complete loss. All she knew was that the clones were her responsibility. She couldn't just abandon them, leave them to fend for themselves. Besides, she was starting to feel extremely fond of them. She had never been needed like this before, and the warm glow in her stomach felt wonderful. It was better than any donut she had ever eaten. Okay. This time her voice was confident. Here's the plan. I'm going to have to hide you somewhere. We'll wait until tonight, and then I can smuggle you out of here under the cover of darkness and drive you to my house in Retchford-on-the-Reek. You'll be safe there with me. Your house? Augustus looked dubious. Thank you so much, Avril, Eddie said. I'm sure we'll be safe with you to look after us. Avril smiled. This would be so much fun. She would take care of these clones as well as she knew how, from the roof over their heads to the food in their mouths, which, come to think of it, first things first, she said, for the second time that day, except that now she knew exactly what ought to come first. Tea time. Okay, we'll stop there for now.